Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on transition. I'm just going to welcome you all really for a minute or two and give everybody time to join us this afternoon on a Friday afternoon. So it'd be interesting. I'm going to be presenting this webinar from Staffordshire, actually, a little village in Staffordshire. So it'd be good to hear where other people are from. So do feel free to pop in the chat where you're from and what your reason for being here, to find out a bit more about transition, primary to secondary transition is today. And then I'll go ahead and introduce myself and we'll get started with that. But I am conscious it'll take a few minutes for everybody to join. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes before we do that. Hello everybody, do join us this afternoon. Seeing some more people come into our session to be tackling on transition and hopefully give you some pointers to take away, and let me know where you're from and your reason for joining us this afternoon while we wait for everybody to join us. I'm going to introduce myself in a few moments, and I'm going to then share my screen and take you through this afternoon's presentation. Yeah, some more people just joining us. So if I can get my screen shared. Right, hopefully can you all hear me and can you all see the screen? Do pop in the chat if you've got any problems with anything from that. Ah, great, we've got people from Wolverhampton just down the road from me, people from Durham. That's super for that. Great, and hopefully I'll give you a couple of ideas of things that you can take away to improve transition from where it is. And if you've got any questions, please put the questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. And I will try, if they pop up, I will try and answer them as we go along, or there should be a bit of time at the end as well to do that. But I am conscious it's a Friday afternoon for everyone. So we'll make a start in a moment or two. I've put my email on the screen there that you can see, suzanne.o'farrell@ascl.org.uk. So if there is anything that you do want to follow up with me afterwards, please just drop me an email. So hello, Melanie from South Tyneside. Great to see people popping things in the chat there. So I'll just, before we really start into it, I just wanted to tell you who I am. My name's Suzanne, as you can see there, and I started out as a modern languages teacher for many years. Absolutely passionate about languages. I think my interest in languages started when I was on a school trip in what was year 7, year 7, and we went to Brittany, and I just fell in love with Brittany and everything I saw there, and that really developed a lifelong passion for languages. I'm absolutely committed to language learning and the intercultural benefits that it can bring you, and a host of other things. So a languages teacher for many years. Then I became head teacher of a large secondary school. I taught a bit on PGC at Keele University at the same time, before I became head. And then after being a head teacher of a large secondary school for 7 years, I joined ASCL, the Association for School and College Leaders, as their curriculum specialist and as their inspection specialist. And I've done that for 5 or 6 years. And now I just work for ASCL in promoting languages among school leaders. So anything across the primary or secondary sector, which is going to enable pupils and school leaders to see the value of languages. So it's a challenge, as you might say. It's an interesting challenge. So hopefully we've got everybody joining us a bit about that now. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is around 2 areas, really. Just get through, if I can get my slide. Yeah, what I'm going to cover today is a little bit about the history of transition, and a little bit about the same old story, really. Some research which you may have come across or you may not have come across, all about transition, why we think it is the key in trying to improve uptake, particularly in secondary, and so much to be able to value the primary experience itself, and to give you 2 tools that you can use to share for transition around that, and to give you the findings of a pilot that we've actually been involved in this year. I think if we go back to the history, 2002 was when in the languages strategy the importance of transition was first mentioned, and then again in 2007 we had the Deering review, which said then if we are to recap or if we are to reap the full benefits of language learning in primary, we must focus on transition. So that was 2007, and here we are all these years later still trying to promote transition, trying to tackle that thorny issue and trying to improve that continuity of learning for our language learners. So if I'm just going to divert a little bit to sort of tell you a bit about languages in crisis almost really at the moment. It's in a very pressurized and pivotal position in our curriculum, hasn't been helped through Brexit and through the pandemic. And you can actually see, this is the latest government figures published just last week. And you can see the black line there for languages. And you can see actually how we're dipping down now in terms of GCSE entry. So we've got humanities and sciences, you know, the EBAC pillars, you know, stabilizing or increasing, but actually we've hit a downward trend on languages, and there's several reasons for that. But one of the things I want to try and point out today is if we can have that successful, you know, transition and build on that and recognize the value and experience of primary, then I think that will help motivation and sustain motivation and uptake at secondary, and it can only be a good thing really. So improving transition could be a support with that. So I've already said it's in crisis, and what we'll see really through those pupils doing our languages in GCSE is that we've got a noticeable inequality of engagement in there. So we've got several groups who are not pursuing their languages in a way we would like, you know, boys, disadvantaged pupils, pupils with SEND, and their engagement after Key Stage 3 is really low. And again, could transition be something to contribute to improving that? We have in fact had 8 years of primary languages at the moment. So the first year that pupils came through with 4 years of their primary was in 2018. And we still face the same barriers to learning, those of staff expertise, curriculum planning, transition, and the time allocation and the variability of time given in pupil settings. So we've still got those barriers. And one of the tools I want to sort of point out today, in fact, both tools really, I think can overcome some of those issues and work around them. So we've got this ongoing shift in the profile of pupils taking languages, so becoming more of a, you know, preserve of the elite almost subject and fewer groups. And I think that's where we have to try and look at doing things differently to what we've done before to improve that. Again, if we look at the British Council language trends for last year, we can see that there's a whole section developed to transition, and it's the same conclusion emerging each year, that actually transition remains underdeveloped in most settings really. There's very little information shared between the two settings, and in fact contact is reducing. You know, you get funding pressures, staff pressures, smaller groups, all of those contribute to that. But the fact is that we had 2019 we had 52%, and this time we've only got 46. We've moved to 46% that have no contact at all with their the two phases between primary and secondary, and in fact 74% of primaries not sharing any data at all there. And of course there is no national steer to guiding the curriculum or imposing a curriculum or accountability in primary. So it's very much, and I don't think the government would go down that line, it's very much really up to schools to take ownership of the process, take ownership of the curriculum and ownership of the transition. And that's in a way my appeal today, is that we do look at that together and work together for the benefit of the pupils. So if we have a look, I mentioned the Deering report back in 2007, highlighting, along with many others along the way, the importance of transition. We've got several recent publications that equally emphasize the importance of it. So we had the pedagogy review in 2016. No doubt you've all heard about that, and you know that that is underpinning the reforms ongoing out in the consultation for the revised GCSE, but clear recommendation there that secondary experience should build on primary knowledge. And the same with the languages white paper, that pupils going into secondary having a clear idea, their colleagues in secondary, of what pupils have explored and retained and can do, and to make that primary experience far more meaningful for pupils really, as well as for the teachers. And I think this document, which is only published quite recently, this has 18 references to transition included in this document, 18. And if we look at some ones for other subjects, you know, relatively very, very few, in fact, 0 in some cases. And that again highlights how Ofsted do see the value of the transition process, an effective and meaningful transition process, actually underpinning success at GCSE for that. And I'm just going to show you a couple of points from that report. So very, very clear in coming through is that pupils' attainment is influenced by the quality of transition. There is this limit on the amount of information being passed between assessment information, and that's one of the tools I want to give you an overview of. And actually, in the conclusion, a high quality education does feature a well-considered transition process. So right at the end of the document, in the summary, where it gives the sort of features of high quality languages education, we'll see clear references to transition and how that is viewed as important. But often in the report, there is indication that actually many of the schools visited don't have an effective transition process at all. So it means that, you know, a lack of effective transition means pupils are starting again from year 7 rather than building on any previous knowledge, and that is leading to a downturn in motivation by the pupils, whereas they feel they're not making the same progress as they are in their other subjects. They're not, that gradient of learning isn't sort of continuing upwards, and they're often repeating work they've done, which it can be demotivating for anyone. If we have a look now at NCELP, the National Centre for Education, we'll see there that they've done some really interesting work on pupils' understanding and appreciation of grammar in Key Stage 2, which I think has huge significance for transition and for secondary colleagues recognising the awareness and the extensive grammatical knowledge that pupils have when they're going from primary into secondary, and that is something that we can build on. And another interesting finding out of that came through that pupils actually appreciate clearly defined rules when they're learning in Key Stage in primary, having knowledge about how language works and appreciating the very explicit presentation of grammar principles, grammar concepts. They can spot patterns, they can know language rules, etc. And they're quite sophisticated in their command of that. You know, obviously I'm generalizing there, but that too, I think, is something that perhaps we don't recognize enough when we're looking at their knowledge about language and building on in Key Stage 3. And I thought that was an interesting piece of research that NCELP had done. You can find that on their portal there, and it might give you a bit of a flavour how their work at Key Stage 2 literacy is dovetailed more into language as well, and their grasp of some of the grammar concepts there. So if we have a look at some really interesting research that I've only recently come across, really, from Baumert, Fleckenstein and others, and there's the link there in the slide that you can have. And this shows the impact of a lack of transition, and makes a clear link between the fact that a poor transition process doesn't enable pupils to value at all their language learning experience at primary school. So do have a look at that research. It's really interesting. And I think another one, when you add Florence Miles's research from the University of Swansea to that, again, building on the point I just made about NCELP, really, she has researched an awful lot to do with pupils in primary language learning, and makes the conclusions that pupils are very much aware of what they're learning in primary languages. They're very much aware of what they know, what they don't know. They see the intrinsic value of language learning. They're aware of their progress. And actually her conclusion was that if we don't keep the continuity of learning going, we don't sustain motivation in the same way. And that lack of continuity is having an impact on their enjoyment and their motivation to continue it beyond Key Stage 3. So that's the research. I now want to tell you about a pilot that took place this year. Now this arose from the pandemic, really, and it's a collaboration between ASCL and 6 into 7 initially in 2020, which designed a sort of web-based platform where teachers shared in the lieu of Key Stage 2 SATs, because obviously we didn't have any then, shared their judgments, their professional judgments that they'd formulated over a period of time, not just a snapshot one-off assessment decision, their judgments they'd formulated extensively, and shared those at the touch of a button, really, very, very simple to use, with secondary colleagues to aid setting, to give pupils knowledge about, to give teachers in secondary colleges knowledge about their pupils' progress. So that worked really well for English and maths. So they've extended it this year, and we ran a pilot into languages because we thought, well, let's put languages on a par with sharing transition data with secondary colleagues and see what happens. And we worked with the Primary Languages Network with schools there in primary and their secondary colleagues, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But it's essentially a mechanism for information sharing. It's a sort of one-stop transition hub, and the judgments that we came up with, you'll see in a moment some of the judgments, they were made, worked out through the teachers, the collaboration between the primary and the secondary teachers to formulate the judgments. So that's a bit about the pilot. And this is what we felt that when we started out on the pilot, this is what we wanted for primary colleagues. We wanted a simple, very, very simple, very quick to use way of sharing pupil progress at an individual pupil level. So this is about sharing that almost assessment data. It helped pupils, it helped colleagues in primary settings think about the most useful information to send on to their secondaries. They were then confident thinking about the curriculum planning. Did it match the national curriculum endpoints? What would be useful there? And also it really just gave value and meaning to that whole primary experience. And teachers reported that they feel that their teaching now matters, that it was going to be built on constructively and effectively at secondary. And actually, we gave lots of online training to the colleagues really in primary to know what the judgments meant. And that increased their confidence, increased their subject leadership, and they had support then in coming to the conclusions about the professional judgments that they wanted to apply to their pupils. So that's what we were aiming for really in the pilot. And you can see there a little bit more about it. I've said it was a sort of web-based application. So we have the UPN numbers of the URNs and numbers of the pupils, and they are just uploaded to the secondary school. We had 10 judgments on pupil progress, very, very quickly to cover all the different areas, and I'll show you that on the next slide. And they were done then round about, we started it quite late, and it would have perhaps been better to have started a little bit early in the year, which is what we're doing this year. And we had the judgments then formulated throughout that first half of the summer term, and they arrived in schools, in secondary schools, just after May half term. So to enable secondary colleagues to use that information then how they saw fit, and obviously shared via a very, very secure portal. So professional judgments, the 10 of them were around the pillars of progress that we're all familiar with: phonics, grammar and vocabulary, a little bit about pupils' ability to apply phonic knowledge. We go into specifics on certain grammar things that they're able to do, but again, very, very quick and simple, their productive skills, receptive skills, and a little bit about their engagement there with the intercultural understanding and enthusiasm for that. And it's really about looking at the 4 judgments there on the right hand side, whether pupils were secure in their learning, not secure. Maybe they were very high attaining, really high capacity for analysis of language, higher motivation, really, really good language detectives. So we felt the teachers over a period of time then were the best place to hand over that educational progress to their new teacher and having a view on how they progressed in language learning. So again, not a snapshot, one-off judgment, but over the course of the year then thinking about whether they were secure, not secure, maybe they've not had access to it, be not recorded, or they were real high flyers in their language skills. So that was how the assessment data was judged. And then we saw from secondary colleagues used extensively to inform setting, to adapt their expectations really of 7 years learning. I think almost with transition, we got to the stages, something is better than nothing. We're not doing this enabled people to really think differently about what their pupils were coming in with and the language they'd learnt. They were able to build on some prior learning and have that continuity. And the one important thing was actually talking to pupils. Pupils knew, as did parents, that information about their progress in language learning was being shared between one setting and another. And that is very significant and powerful in motivating pupils because it matters. This subject is on a par now with other subjects for a first time. And that, I think, changed pupils' expectation of what they were going in to learn in the secondary setting, as well as teachers' expectations. And of course, it gives that actionable base for teachers to build upon then. So that's what we hoped. And here are some comments from teachers that took part in it, and they reported to it afterwards. They found, they had got evidence to support their settings. They'd got a preliminary idea of what might happen, but it really informed that. Again, they felt from secondary colleagues' perception that their subject was elevated and on a par with other subjects. We often feel that we're slightly worse off in the curriculum, but that changed expectations from everybody concerned. It supported decisions about dual linguists there, and actually enabled colleagues in secondary setting to change the order of how they taught things. So actually that group maybe went on to study school as a topic first rather than going over some basic information, because they could do that very, very quickly. And we've mentioned the point there about just updated the pupil's perception of the subject as well. So that was what colleagues were saying. And I think we also found that it didn't really matter what language you were going on to do in Key Stage 3. And we set a lot of store by this and said, no, we can't have continuity learning because it's a different language. But I think as linguists, we know that if you can learn one language and you've got some language strategies and you know how to learn a language, you can transfer those quite easily to another setting. You've got a good idea really of whether the gender, is there gender cognates, position of adjectives, silent letters, patterns. You'll have all of those questions that you can bring, and all of those things that you can bring from transferring your skills of learning a language into another language. So I think a good languages teacher in secondary can actually build on that and draw those links and explore those commonalities in a very effective way, and recognize and value that previous language learning experience, even if it is a different language, because the transferable skills are so prominent really in that, and the enthusiasm and willingness to engage with the culture as well. So that wasn't so much of a problem. We've got some more information if you want about this. This is an ASCL blog that's coming soon about the pilot, what we found, and obviously I've got the link there to Ask Eddie, which is the platform that's developed that, and 6 into 7. So you'll see there on the website testimonials from people who have taken part for it, and it's a commercial product in particular, that one. So secondary schools would purchase that, and all the details and information are on there as well. But it aids that communication, and I think if schools do decide to go down that route with the English and maths as well, it can be transformative in terms of just getting transition rolling in your schools. And and working things through and upskilling secondaries and primaries in a way that we haven't done before. It really is quite unique in that respect. So that's the one tool, which I said is a commercial tool. I'm now going to give you another tool to aid transition, which is free and which is developed 2 years ago by ASCL and by the primary steering group for the Association of Language Learning. And this really is, you can download it today. And this again has come about from thinking, let's have a starting point. Let's get the ball rolling. Let's just think about what pupils, how can we take pupils in primary and give to secondaries an indication of the content that they may well have really explored and retained and really got in there, just as some sort of actionable base that secondaries say, oh yes, they've done that quite well, you know, they're really familiar with that. So that's what was our starting point, and how can we do something, and what, you know, what's left in the sieve of pupils after 4 years of language learning. So this is not about the assessment, which the previous tool was. That was assessment on an individual level. This is about how can I send up to my primary, my secondary school, what my pupils really know and have covered and explored. And we developed this. This is the information paper about it, and if you just search on ASCL Transition Toolkit, you'll find it, and you can download it in French, German, Spanish, and Mandarin, and it's all there freely. And it says there, it's a practical, workable tool to support effective transition around that. And it has research behind it to start off with, but it is simply a framework, and it has what we think is the minimum body of conceptual knowledge. So the grammar, the vocabulary, not very much, you know, the vocabulary, the phonology that you think pupils could well have reached by the end of year 6 after 4 years of language learning. So that's all there on one side, and then what you could do is you just drag and drop or copy across into the blank boxes that language, those concepts, that grammar that your pupils, for the majority, are really quite familiar with. For that, there are opportunity to then add comments on it if, you know, pupils haven't had that much time allocation for it, or if you've got a large number of feeder schools. But if pupils in secondary, if colleagues in secondary are receiving these, and you've got everybody in your partnership or all your feeder schools using it, as secondary colleagues, you can see where the overlap is. You can see what pupils have done, you know, those particular high frequency verbs in the first person singular, for example, third person singular, and we can use that as a starting point for that. So it's, and I'll show you what it looks like in a moment. It's there, it's a sort of suggestion of what might be covered at the end of year 6, and you can use that then to pass up to your secondary school. And in fact, you could adapt it. It's fully editable, so you and your secondary in time, or primary and secondary colleagues, could agree what would be the most useful language to be taught, the most useful you know, grammar and vocabulary to be taught in that. And you know, so, well, you're going to work, it'd be really good if you worked on that on primary, and we've got all our feeder schools working on that particular aspect, and then they transfer to secondary, and you've got that common base that you can work on there. So that's the link to it for there. And this is the, I'll show you now how it works. So this is the French template around that, and then on the left hand side you've got on the far left box you've got, you know, the description of what it is, and then in the middle box you've actually got the language, and you can see there it's a bit of a description about it as well around that, and you've got some sort of, you know, different verbs and things there in those two middle boxes that you could use, and then you can either highlight them or you can eliminate them, or you can drag them across into the final box for that, and you can just do the ones that you've actually covered around that, and it gives you an overview of what we think it might look like. So that's the French, and there we are, showing you the different things that you can highlight and have covered there, and that's a little bit more. So have they done the, you know, the verb avoir for that? Which of those sort of key verbs there do they know? And you can sort of, it's really sort of summary of what you might have covered or what they might have retained. And this is just the German one, and this just gives you an overview of the kind. So it looks a huge list, but it isn't very long. The whole toolkit only covers 4 pages of A4. So it really is not an extensive list. So it's a minimal key group idea of some of the things they've done. You know, you go over, if they're really familiar with j'ai or je suis or something like that, and they go to secondary and they're spending ages doing that, then at least the secondary colleague has got an idea of it, and it's starting the ball rolling, it's starting the communication, it's starting the process. Because when we found with a pilot, when we approached secondaries, most of them said, oh, actually, it's been something I've been meaning to get around to doing, is contact my primary and find out what they're doing. We just haven't had time. And now that we're all much used to working more virtually, you know, this could be done electronically. You can send it over, you can find, you know, get in touch with a colleague, and is it useful to give you an overview of what my pupils have retained and explored in over their 4 years of primary, and it starts the ball rolling really. And we found that when ASCL and AskEdi acted as that catalyst to try and provide something that was for the, you know, the previous tool, it really did bring people together in a way that we had not managed to do before. So this could help you with that. So those are the sorts of things it covers in the German one that you can have a look. But again, as I say, it's not very long at all. At the end of it as well, there is an appendix, and that just highlights and gives an overview of schemes of work that we recommend and we think that would dovetail into the framework. So you can choose to do those, have a look at those if you want. And I think just to sort of finish up really with transition, I think we've done this, you know, it's something that we've not tackled, and it can only be a good thing if we can find the right tool, that simple way that isn't time onerous, is for the benefit of the pupils, for that, and updates that subject for them in their view. So it is success in uptake at secondary, I think, is underpinned really by a successful transition process and a meaningful primary experience. And I think that really is something that we hold on to. If we want to get some of those disenfranchised groups, if we want to look at, you know, the groups that aren't opting for it at Key Stage 3, it's Key Stage 3 where they're going to make those decisions really for what they're going to opt. What can we do in Key Stage 3? And by building on and recognizing as much as we can from their primary experience, that I think is the way forward. The beauty about both of these tools is that they've been produced by the profession, for the profession. There's been colleagues that have been involved in formulating the professional judgments in the cloud-based judgment, and the overview in the second part of the second tool is there as well from the ALL steering group. So it can only be a good thing to try and, you know, take ownership of it and give pupils the best start really in their educational journey in secondary for languages. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to see if we've got any questions in the Q&A that people have said, can I share the toolkit? I can share the toolkit, yes. So I'll try and do that now if I can move to sharing my screen. I'm not particularly, let's have a look at, let's stop the share, and I can try and get the toolkit open up for you. So the ASCL transition toolkit is just on its way to you now, I think, for that. So that's the link to the ASCL transition toolkit that I've just put there. How would you suggest beginning work with our local secondary schools around transition? We don't do anything at the moment. I think the first thing is to contact, you know, to find the name of the head of department or the head of languages, and take the initiative. As I say, we found in all the schools that we were doing the transition with, suddenly we facilitated conversations that did want to happen, but they hadn't found a reason for them happening. They hadn't found a tool. So maybe contacting them and suggesting, we've got this, you know, freely available toolkit from if you're going down that route, or obviously it'll be for the secondaries to take the initiative as well over the, you know, as AskEdi platform. we've got a toolkit from ASCL. This is it. I can email the link over. Would you be interested in receiving an overview of what some core language key things our pupils have retained and explored over their 4 years of language learning? So, approach them because you have something to approach them with, rather than it just being open-ended and not knowing how to start. So it's just a starting point. And in all our conversations with Ofsted and policy developers looking at that, anything was better than nothing was the view that we were coming back from. Try something and see what happens with it. Use this toolkit for there, but then you might develop your own for that. But secondary colleagues are always being asked how they're building on prior learning from primary. So they need really to look at this. They need to recognize what's going on. And this provides a way in which they do that for that, I think. So I've got, do you give general copy to secondary school? Each pupil have their own assessment. It's a copy. The one tool around the ASCL free one is just an overview of what your pupils have studied. So it's not at an individual level. The Ask Eddie cloud-based judgments are at an individual assessment level. So you could do both in a way. Do you want assessment? Do you want to pass on assessment data? Or do you want to pass on just an overview of around that? And if you're passing on assessment data for other subjects, for example, in your English and maths with Ask Eddie, or even if you're not using it for that, certainly go ahead and get individual assessment data. You'd be, that's leading the way. Our pilot schools last year very much felt that they were invigorated, leading the way with transition, really looking at, it's the first time they've really looked at a professional judgment for language learning experience over 4 years and passed that particular information on to the secondaries, and the secondaries were delighted with the information and wanted to build on that and do it slightly differently next year and have the information find more uses for that information as well. And don't forget that point about parents and pupils being transformed by the fact that there is this conversation all of a sudden about valuing primary and building on it in secondary, which we haven't done enough of up to date, really. Any more questions around that? So I think, yeah, we're coming to an end, but I do think if there are any questions, or if anybody wants me to email them anything else, or do get in touch around that. The number of qualified teachers, yeah, the qualified language teachers, I mean, there is a fantastic MOOC for primary languages that was on Future Learn at some point. So there is lots of CPD around that. And obviously the number of language teachers across both sectors isn't great at the moment. We are always looking to retrain specialists to work with people. So that is another barrier to the situation. What we did find with the Ask Eddie platform is that specialists and non-specialists felt empowered by the online training that we provided, because it gave them a view of what to work towards the end of Key Stage 2. What were the key learning points? What was the key grammar that secondary colleagues were hoping for that they'd covered and knowledge of? So it upskilled the specialists, the non-specialists in primary in a confident, supportive way. And the best email to contact me on, I would just pop my email into the chat. So it's Susanna Farrell at ascl.org.uk. So do contact me if there's anything we can help with transition, or with talking to senior leaders in particular about the value of languages in both settings. I think that's where my interest lies, really, in what can we do to encourage all school leaders and members of senior teams to see the value of language learning in both primary and secondary. And I've had my eyes open to what happens in primary settings over the past years, starting out as a secondary colleague in languages, and it really is quite impressive. And that's what I want to try and do here, is try and ensure that we're recognizing and building on that effectively in a secondary setting. So yes, if you haven't got the slides coming through the language, so then do email me, and I can send those as well. So I've just got a couple of minutes left, so if there's any more questions coming through, I'll just keep an eye on that. But if not, thank you very much for attending this afternoon. Good luck with all your transition processes, and contacting secondaries if you're in a primary setting for that. Okay, thanks everybody, and bye-bye.